Well, welcome everybody to the latest episode of the Know-It-Alls. Today we have 4 participants who are going to talk about rabbit holes. And the first one will be Alden O'Brien, who is curator of costumes and quilts and textiles at the DAR Museum in Washington, D.C. and several books and articles and speeches and all the things that curators do. So, Alden, it's up to you.
Okay, thank you. The subject of my rabbit hole is this quilt in the DAR collection, which was included in our book published a number of years ago by the Martha Pullen Company, which you might know, Historic Quilts in the DAR Museum. And it was also included in our 2005 exhibition, Quilts from a Young Country, which you may have seen at the Houston Quilt Festival. It's obviously an album quilt, and it's from Burlington County, New Jersey, just across from Philadelphia. This is prime Quaker country, and the style of this quilt is typical of quilts made by Quakers in this area in the mid-19th century. I chose this partly because a similar one of this type just sold at winter auctions in Connecticut. It was purchased by a Connecticut-based collector who recently died, and her collection is being sold in the course of several auctions. So check back with this auction house if you're interested. A typically rambling genealogy note was attached to this quilt, which gives us all the clues we need to figure out that this too is from Burlington County, New Jersey, and was made by Quakers. Anne Atkinson Wright, who assembled it, was born in 1819, married in 1832, and assembled this in about 1841, which we know because of her grandmother and namesake's inscription, which said that she was in her 86th year of her age, or was 85 when she signed it, having been born in 1756. We can find Anne's family in Quaker meetings, the equivalent of parishes, and in census records in Burlington County and in Mansfield and Springfield townships. And you see the 2 of them pointed to there. This is about 30 miles from Philadelphia. And then this one at the Philadelphia Museum of Art is attributed to Caroline Gillingham, who apparently was not Quaker and lived in Philadelphia, so fairly close. Similar aesthetics, but not specifically Quaker or New Jersey. So apparently the style spread. Styles are not great respecters of rivers and state borders. And here's the DAR Museum one, as you can see. You can see that they all share, they're all blocks set on point with sashing in between. And there's an overall palette that favors olive green, which is a Quaker color when you look at Quaker clothing. But as Lynn Bassett discusses in her talks on Gothic era fashions, the golden olive tone was very popular generally in fashion at this time, and was considered to be the color of Gothic ruins at sunset, or some such fanciful notion. But there's also lots of red here and other colors, including yellow, various blues from sky blue to Prussian blue, some pinks, and so on. And you can see how they share that aesthetic. So I love a good chart to try to understand things and their similarities and how they connect. So here's the chart of some of the similar blocks that you see on all 3. And across the top is the Philadelphia quilt, the middle is the one that just sold, and the bottom row, excuse me, is the DARs. So you've got some of these wild goose chase variations starting on the left column. You've got some Ohio stars and sort of Ohio stars in various combinations. You've got a whole lot of blocks that are playing with lots and lots of triangles. You've got others that are playing with lots of different squares. You've got mariner's compasses, obvious ones, and sort of, semi-compassy looking ones, Caesar's crown, and some chintz. Ours doesn't actually have chintz, but it has this one embroidered square. So our quilt actually comes from Chesterfield Township, which, as you can see, is right next door to the 2 where the auction house quilt is. So we're all right in that same area. And what I wanted to do was figure out who made this quilt. We had the history that came with the quilt that said it was made for or by Thomas Sykes, but he was really an old man when this was made. So that seems sort of doubtful. So I wanted to look at the family tree and figure out what's going on. And what we found is Virginia Viss and I both dug into this rabbit hole. We plunged down this rabbit hole and figured out who everybody was. Nancy Gibson had figured out all the names. A couple of them, when we looked again, we were able to correct a couple of names. Harold was actually Thomas. The surname Holden turned out to be Alden. Sometimes those letters are formed in ways that are hard to recognize. But if you look here, the yellow blocks are Sykes family, and the orangey blocks are Earl family. Thomas Sykes is right there in the middle with the green Caesar's crown. And his sister Edith married someone named Earl. So the Earls are all basically cousins of the Sykeses. And then the pink at the lower left, I included as part of the Earl, kind of part of the Earls, because they're one of the Earl wives' mothers. So she's an Earl mother-in-law. So she's adjacent. The rest are distant kin, or, you know, just neighbors, and maybe there's some connection, because in these small communities, you can probably find that somebody's a third cousin once removed. But basically, this is the majority of the blocks are from these two branches of the family. And here's a family tree. So we have at the right, Thomas Sykes and his children, Anne, George, Lydia, and Edith. Beulah was not alive at this time. Thomas's sister Mary had a son named John, who later would marry Anne Sykes. But Anne Sykes appears with her maiden name here, so we know it's before her 1849 marriage that this quilt was made. And then another sister, Edith, married Thomas Earl, and we see a bunch of Earl descendants. And the gray names are people who are already dead at the time the quilt was made. The black names are ones who do not appear on the quilt, and the red ones are ones who do appear on the quilt. And the blue Elizabeth, we're not sure, and I'm about to get into that. Part of the problem is that if you play Where's Waldo with the blocks, as Virginia Viss likes to call it, she accuses me of loving to play Where's Waldo and getting deep into the weeds of this, to mix metaphors. Weeds, Where's Waldo, rabbit hole, whatever. I was looking at the blocks and trying to figure out if we could solve any of these mysteries, because some of the inscriptions overlap, and there, you know, a bunch of people were named Edith after the grandmother Edith Sykes Earl. So which cousin Edith is E.S. Earl, and which one is Edith, and which Elizabeth is Lizzie, and which is E.K. or Elizabeth K. or E.A. There's a bunch of overlapping E's and Elizabeths that are a little bit hard to suss out. But sometimes looking at matching blocks can give you clues. So for example, the top two blocks here are signed Martha and Tanton Earl. And if you go back here, look on the left column here, Tanton Earl married Martha. So that's a married couple. Martha probably made one for him and one for her. So if you go back and look at some of the other matching blocks, one would hope that we might be able to figure out who's who. So for example, these two crosses here at the bottom that I've picked out, one of them says Lizzie. And so which Lizzie is it? We've got a whole bunch of Elizabeths, but the other one is signed Mary H, and they're sisters. So I think that it's reasonable to suppose, I don't call it proof, but I think it's a fairly good hypothesis to suggest that looking at some of the matching blocks can help figure out which branch of the family some of these mystery blocks go to. And here's another one where we have E.A. Earl. Which Elizabeth is that? Not sure. These other two blocks on the bottom row are from the right-hand column. The lists that we have in the file and the numbering system is a little confusing. So, and I just haven't had time to go back into storage and unfold it and figure out exactly which name is assigned to which block, because I have a couple of different lists and they conflict. So I haven't solved all of these issues, and clearly I'm going to have to go back down the rabbit hole. But this is the kind of deep dive we like to do, looking at the family trees and looking at the signatures, figuring out if we really do have the correct signatures transcribed, and figuring out who is Edith, who is Elizabeth, who is Lizzie, who is EA, who is EK, what branch do they belong to. And I think with a little bit more going back to the original quilt rather than the photographs and the lists in the file, I'll be able to figure it out. But here we could figure out fairly easily, who do we not see on the quilt? We see all, and remember we had, going back to here, all of these center areas. We have Thomas Sykes and his children and his future son-in-law are all right around there in the center. So, but we don't see Edith. We see the other children who are alive, Anne, George, and Lydia, and Anne's fiance, but we don't see Edith. Well, Edith married in 1847, shortly before Anne Sykes would have married John Curtis, and it descended in her family. So that's not a terribly difficult mystery to solve. We are able to say, okay, this was not made for Thomas Sykes, but it was made for his daughter, Edith, around the time of her marriage. And for the rest of it, we're just going to have to go back down that rabbit hole. And that's all. I'll stop sharing so you don't get too dizzy.
Wow, nicely done.
Thank you.
Yes. We love the chart. We love the chart.
A good chart is always helpful.
Yes, and fun to do. Now, you said you didn't have time for further research, but that's what a rabbit hole is. It makes
I don't mean I don't have time.
time.
No, I don't. I only meant that I didn't have time to go into storage before this deadline. That's all I mean. I mean that I'm going to have to follow up and do that. I thought that I had solved all of these things, and when I brought out the file, I realized that some of the ways things were written down on my lists, I had not been completely clear on exactly which inscription was on exactly which numbered block, or how the numbers worked. So I confused myself, and I didn't have time before the end of last week to go and go and check on that. So
well, the diabolical thing about the rabbit hole is you look up and 5 hours have gone by and you weren't supposed to be doing that.
That's the danger.
Which of course is fun.
But you often find good stuff in the meantime.
Oh, often you do. And I mean, we all love doing it, which is why we're talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I wanted to go back and say at the auction a couple of weeks ago, when I saw that quilt, I had just read Jessica Nicole's book from quite a while ago, in which she talked about Delaware Valley friendship quilts. And then there's some more recent writing on Hicksite Quakers and how these people are not just Quakers. They're the radical Hicksite Quakers. So I looked at that quilt online and I said, New Jersey, Burlington, Quaker. And then, of course, they knew quite a bit about it. So it's your description of the style there really determines a specific regional style. And the thing that's so important is that these are early. It's like they invented it.
Mm-hmm.
And being friends to invent a friendship quilt.
Well, that one that just sold is 1841-ish. So that's 6 years earlier than ours. And I know there are others out there. I don't remember where they all are, but it would be interesting to do a comparison. But I suspect that 1841 is a fairly early example.
Julie's mother had a quilt that had various dates, and one of them was 1839. Which is
I still have it. I still have that quilt.
Oh, good. I'm glad. That's great.
Yeah.
It's all pieced and repetitious sawtooth kind of thing.
Right. I want to ask an overall question, which I think people wonder about a lot. So far, these quilts have been referred to by us. You, Alden, as an album quilt. Is that what you called it? Yes. And Barbara, you just referred to these as friendship quilts. And I thought it might be worth discussing the difference between, if we can, between album, sampler, and friendship quilts, because these are all three. Aren't they all three?
I guess it is. I mean, the friendship quilt doesn't have to be an album quilt. A friendship quilt, if I'm correct, or a signature quilt, we could also throw that term in, is one that has different signatures of people who are family and friends doing the project together. The album quilt is a subset of that, where each block is a different design, although you may have some repeats. And the the way people tend to describe it is, think of a signature, like an album book where you keep where your friends sign, make a signature and write a little poem or something.
Autograph album.
An autograph album. Thank you. And this is like a fabric version of an autograph album, where each page becomes a block and it's all spread out into a quilt. So each person has their own little album page, but it's a fabric version. So that's how it got called an album quilt, because it's the textile version of one of those autograph albums, which were hugely popular in the 1810s, 20s, 30s, 40s, as part of the sentimental romantic age. People were keeping those in paper versions too. And a sampler quilt, as I understand it, someone else can correct me, is one in which every block is different, but I don't know whether that but I don't think it necessarily has to be signed or made by different friends or as a project. It might be done by just one person, but they choose to do.
But quilts like these three that you show all three fit the category. I mean, they fit the three categories.
They fit all four categories: sampler, album, signature, friendship.
Right. And just one note here, which is that Xenia Cord has made a very good distinction, I think, between signature quilts. If you call it a signature quilt, it implies that it's the signature of the person who made it. So
Okay.
She's suggesting that we call these inscribed quilts and with names. You know what I mean?
Oh, okay.
If it's all in one handwriting, we know that, which it often is, a scribe has been chosen or hired.
Okay.
It isn't an actual signature quilt. And I think it's an interesting distinction.
Oh, that is an interesting description. Yeah, distinction. So that's 5 different terms that we have to parse out and be careful we use correctly.
Debbie knows quite a bit about those scribe.
Just a little. Debbie knows just a little about that.
She's not
Muted.
You're muted, dear. Yeah, Debbie knows how to identify certain fracture writers, which I think is amazing.
The interesting thing to me about the appearance of this quilted auction, and which Barbara has looked into, is that the Hicksites split from the Orthodox like back in the 1820s, and yet here in the 1840s they are still using a very tight and very close design similarity for the blocks, especially on those two, on the album quilt and the DIR quilt. They were made not very long apart. And where did they go to get the designs? I mean, was there a store selling them? Were there patterns passed around? I mean, they're very similar for a very brutal religious split where some families just didn't talk to each other, but they still have the same design vocabulary for their quilts.
Interesting.
Which is kind of amazing.
Yeah.
The other Quakers are called Orthodox Quakers, I guess.
Yes.
So there's two main. But I mean, someone should go through these and look up all the, it's a rabbit hole. Genealogy, are these Hicksites or are they Orthodox, But I do feel Hicksites, being more radical, were innovative here in starting this fashion.
Well, that could be too.
I'll have to get back to you all on the Facebook page about whether whether these two families were one or the other, because I confess I forgot to consider that, but it's worth considering.
Well, you can, the best way to find it is to find where they're buried, and then you can look at the church and they will, often the churches, the Friends, it's like.
Yeah, I was looking at the Earls and Sykeses, and they were in town rather than Friends Meeting House burying grounds. So that didn't give me a clue to be able to tell you that right away. So I'll have to follow up on the Facebook page.
I want to say one thing about the terms. Album quilt is a period name. You can find album quilt if you look diaries, letters, and newspapers. But the others, friendship, signature. I think those are terms we have reflexively named them later. But they all fit. I mean, they all describe it, and that one was four ways.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Do we have time for somebody, maybe Debbie, to talk about the relationship between these quilts and Baltimore album quilts? In a nutshell.
Oh, they're much more similar to each other than they are to Baltimore albums. And they do not have the floral blocks the way Baltimore albums. So even though some of the earliest ones came along in the early 1840s, they're much more floral than any of the Pennsylvania or New Jersey quilts, just across the board.
Good.
And they're quite different from most Philadelphia albums at the time. The Philadelphians really focused on the cutout chintz, where they would take the floral and cut it up. And so there's some regionalism early, but then it begins all to mush together.
Well, and Baltimore also so often has the focus on reds and greens.
Yes, they used
not exclusively, but largely.
Right. Some chintz cutouts in the earlier Baltimore albums, but they fade out fairly quickly to the red and green, and then to the constructed, both the constructed florals and the really reverse applique even.
And they really don't care for the geometric ones like the ones.
Not so much.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's time for Barbara.
Good.
Yes. And Barbara needs no introduction, but I'll say anyway that she is into so many different quilt activities that we can't even catalog them all, and fabric design and block design and author and general guru of quilting. So,
well,
it's yours.
The guru will speak here then. Let me see. But I'm going to talk about a different kind of thing, a sampler. The work on this particular quilt, to me, looks like the work of one woman. You can see writing on it, but those are not names. Those are the names of the plants that are depicted. Now, you see, the rabbit hole makes its own time. I started on this maybe 40 years ago when I was writing my Encyclopedia of Pieced and Appliqué quilt pattern books. And I had noticed this, it's in the Shelburne, and that there are names on the blocks. There are not very many quilts where the name is actually on the block. So I was thrilled. I ordered a black and white photo from the Shelburne. They were glad to send it to me. And then I deciphered the names. Well, now, of course, it's much easier to do this. But let me go down and show you some of the names. I don't know if they're inked or embroidered. Possibly embroidery, but not well done, as you can see. I love the way the True Lover's Knot, she didn't plan it out as well as she should. Just to curve it in there. So True Lover's Knot, is that an abstract name or is that a plant? Because her other blocks tend to be more botanical, especially this woodbine here. I know what a woodbine is. She called it a woodbine. I call it bindweed in Kansas. And it looks quite a bit like that with those leaves, and the flowers are white though, not red. Now, I just wondered when I was looking at this, I thought, well, it doesn't fit the categories of friendship album. It's more like a botanical collection. And they were called herbariums at the time, herbarium. And many, many women spent their time and their education making herbariums. It was considered quite good science for women because it was pretty. It was fairly easy to collect. There was no dissecting. of bugs or anything. And so many schools taught botany as the appropriate women's science. And the product that you made was a scrapbook of things you personally collected. And then you were, like Alden, you were supposed to make charts, and people who loved doing that, just some of them became professional botanists. But here we have one, it's pretty much 20th century in the center. But someone had visited Germany, and she collected things, dried them, flattened them out, and put them in a scrapbook. And that's what this quilt looks like to me, much more of a scrapbook of botany than the names being for the formal kind of Germanic quilt blocks that we are so much more familiar with. The only one that I've seen that looks like one of those red and green Germanic traditional folk art things with the perfect four-way symmetry is the dahlia wreath. I would not call it a dahlia. I would have called it a rose wreath, but she calls it a dahlia wreath. So this is pretty interesting, and I filed all that information away. And then one day I saw another one at the Pook and Pook auction. It was alarming. I thought, oh my goodness, the Shelburne has sold their quilt. I want it. Then I realized it was not the same quilt. And but it's so similar that when you lay one on top of another, if you look up here and start, in the corners and then go down here and lay, they're the same size, the blocks are the same size. The major difference is that there's a grape block, and in one it's going left and one it's going right. Unfortunately, this does not have any names on it, any writing on it that we can find. And they didn't know much about it. So I filed that away, and this was probably 10 years ago. I thought, whoa, what's it all mean? Well, then I started seeing more. And my friend Carolyn Miller posted this one. She lives in Texas and is quite a collector. It has the same blocks. I've learned to recognize the blocks like the pokeberry here. It's kind of awkward, doesn't have that symmetry that we're used to in quilt patterns. And the berries fit your ability to make berries, or your taste for making berries. They're different numbers. But notice that the leaves are the same, and that kind of upside down bow is the same. So this is Carolyn's, and that makes 3. There's a number down there at the bottom. Well, then things started jumping at me, and especially with the internet. And so here we have one. All I can say is this one's floating around on the internet, but I certainly recognize the woodbine down there, or the bindweed, and there's the grape and the true lover's knot. Now, none of these, I have another one here, have names on them. The only one that has a name is the Shelburne's, the names of the plants. Then the Montana Project, in their book, had this one. Here's the woodbine. This is a hopweed. Here's the true lover's knot. And this one is set quite differently with that real strong red sashing. They tend to be on point. And one thing that's interesting about them is that when you set blocks on point, you've got to resolve these edges, here. We have, what are you going to put there? I would put blanks, but they cut up wreath blocks. And that's very consistent across these quilts. Very consistent that the same or very similar block is cut in half and arranged around the sides. So now I've got 5. Well, then Donna Stakovich, who's an old pen pal, posted this one once. And I said, wait a minute, it's got the blocks, although it's very different because it's straight instead of on point. But I recognize the grape, I recognize the woodbine, and there's the one with the dots, as many dots as you care to put on it. Carolyn's has the sawtooth border, and so does Donna's, although Donna has a double border. Hers is, I believe, is just the top though. So she didn't know a thing about it. She has been buying quilts in the Midwest for decades, and she's got a fabulous collection, but we don't know a thing about it. So now I'm up to 6. Then the New York Project a couple of years ago started putting their findings up there, and I came across this one. And it was found in Rochester, and it is dated 1849. And it's the best picture I've got. And I don't know that I can ever find it again. You know, you'd have to go back to 20, 30 years and find the owner because it was in a private collection. I don't know what this says down here. They say in the Quilt Index where the files are available that it's people's names. But could there be 2 lines there that say something like Hopvine? The blocks are similar, but some of them, here we have the berries. Some of them are a little bit expanded. The grapevine has a lot more things going on there. So I don't know the names of the people who signed them, or the scribe, who the scribe signed them for. But several of these are very familiar. It is supposedly dated 1849, and the woman who brought it in many years ago for them to document said that it had been a gift from this woman, Florence Thompson Struts, who was an elderly woman that she knew, and it was a gift. Now it's out of the family once Mrs. Struts gave it to her. So I looked up Florence Struts. I thought, my goodness, here it is. I've got a name. I've got a place, Rochester. Well, Florence was born in 1904. There's no way she made a quilt made in 1849. My heart was broken. So that's all I've got is that name and that place. But then, so I'm getting ready to do this. And as I say, the rabbit hole makes its own time. I don't have time to work on this. But I started thinking about Florence. Well, what if Florence's mother made it? What if Florence's mother-in-law made it? You know, you often inherit your mother-in-law's stuff. Well, I looked up the parents. It doesn't take as long as it used to. So Florence was born in 1904. She married Mr. Struts. Her parents, her father, Jorgen, was Danish, but her mother, Barbara Reinfeld, was born in New York, probably Rochester, of German descent. But she was born in 1863, too late to have made the quilt. You know, she wouldn't have been able to make that till she was 10, 15 years old, very minimum. So 1840, whatever it was, is too early for her. His parents are very similar. He was born of, I think, Lena, as I call her Lena here, Magdalene Bicycle Struts, was born in New York, and the censuses tell us that she was German and French. And I had a great-grandmother named Lena, Magdalena, who was also German and French, and I think that's Alsace-Lorraine is what we're talking about here. She's a little bit younger than my Lena, great-grandmother. So anyway, everybody's too young to have made this. And I found out easy online right now to find all this genealogy, found out the names of the parents from the marriage record, which I found on the family search. So I was sort of there, and I thought, well, I got 7 quilts, and here I am holding the pig, me and Alice. What, there's really, I can't go anywhere with this. But while I was getting it done, I thought, wait a minute, what is the point of this? Was this a project in a girls' school? Was this a class project? Was it the sewing teacher working with the botany professor working? So then I thought, what kind of girls' schools are in Rochester, New York? And here are 2. But I had to stop because I had to get this done. But you can tell what I'm probably doing in the next couple of weeks anyway. Reading the ads to see what you could learn at these Rochester female schools. So it's the typical rabbit hole where it keeps you entertained off the streets, but you're walking around with a pig in baby clothes. What is the point of it? So you guys got anything to help me with here?
Well, I love that this is sending us all back down the rabbit hole, basically, because
Yes,
that's what happens with rabbit holes, is that
they don't have a bottom. They don't have
you don't have a bottom. You just keep on going.
Barbara, I have a question. One of the quilts had 2 birds with 3. Was it an Oddfellows?
I don't know. There's, I can't. That's the best I've got.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Oddfellows symbol is 3 rings, and certainly many album quilts from Baltimore, everywhere were, and up to New York, were made sort of to reflect your fraternal organizations or your husband's
Right.
fraternal.
Well, you did, this presentation was so helpful because it actually tells people what you did and how you did it. And I'm wondering if that too might be a clue as you start researching these people, if somebody's an odd felt, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I could just sit there and look through the entire census of Rochester, New York in 1849, because you can. I have things to do. My garden needs watering. It's hot here.
You're not going to find a occupation quilt maker though.
No, I'm very, very rarely, like we've got maybe 3 people ever.
I'm going to turn off my video for 1 second. I have to close the door.
Young women who are doing this as class assignments.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Very-
Julie, that quilt you've got behind you, you have a sampler with just on your shoulder. I'm looking kind of botanical there. There are
Oh,
botanical quilts. There are many other botanical quilts,
yeah.
but they don't have the same blocks. You don't have the
Right.
hop over and over. So
Right.
the only thing I can think of to do with it is make a pattern, entertain myself, and put it as the block of the month next year. And then
Be good.
then I'll have control over the whole thing. At least I can make it in colors I like.
Yeah. Well, I like these that you've chosen because they're realistic. I mean, so many of the botanicals that you see on other quilts are very, very flat. They're impressionistic. They're not, they don't look anything like real flowers. They're very attractive, but to see a crossover between the exact flower, even some of them being named, and the quilt block is very interesting, because that's the one-to-one comparison, and you're not getting a, you know, something that's just too wild and too just discombobulated.
I think
Well, you know, Julie, go.
well, when we met last Monday, I think I showed you guys a quilt that was botanical and had the names on each block from quite a bit later, I think, because the colors suggested 1880 to me. And the names of it was flowers, trees, and leaves, and everyone had embroidered in script what it was, including the sunflower. That was, most people would know what a sunflower is, but she told us anyway. And I wonder if it's in the same school. No, I mean, I don't mean directly, but
Same idea.
I'll put that on the Facebook page so that people.
I looked
Yeah.
after you posted that. I mean, we were just sitting around talking, as we often do. And I looked at every block in it, and there were no duplicates.
Yeah.
Now, we have a wonderful quilt that's just a top that is leaves that someone collected in Kansas in the 40s. And they're just green leaves, beautifully copied and appliqued. And the name is on the back in pencil, each leaf. And
The other thing about the one I'm going to post is that the proportions are odd. What you're showing, the blocks have a similar scale, but in mine, a sunflower doesn't fill up the whole block, but a couple leaves would fill up the whole block. So the ratio, or whatever you call that, is different too.
I love that both talking about what an album quilt is and the herbarium. We're both talking about women taking paper products, you know, craft hobby projects that they would have, whether collecting plants or collecting the signatures and inscriptions of friends, and they're turning it into textile versions. And of course, women had so much to do with sewing, so much to do with producing the textiles in their family. It sort of makes sense that the paper and the textile would kind of have a crossover in media. But I love that these two adjacent that neither of us knew what the other was going to be doing, and we didn't know that we'd be talking about the album as the, you know, the fabric version of the textile of the paper. But I love that connection, that herbarium really is another example of women taking paper products and turning them into textile projects.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Now, if I were teaching today, we do the interdisciplinary approach, and I would work with the science teacher and teach the kids to make quilts, you know.
Yeah.
It'd be very much fun.
You
But
could have a whole class, each person could contribute one flower.
I know it would be fun, but I'm not doing that. So thank you for your input.
Okay, are we ready to go on?
I think we are.
Okay. And Merikay Waldvogel is another one of the quilt world's brightest stars, with her publications on Southern quilt, Tennessee quilts, 20th century quilts, author and lecturer, and she's going to tell us an interesting rabbit hole today, I know. So go right ahead.
Thank you, Debbie.
All right.
Okay. Here we go. Well, again, this is kind of fun. Mine does tie in with the previous two in an odd sort of way, but it goes even deeper down. What I started with was I decided that almost every day my life has an opportunity to go down a rabbit hole. And one day, a couple weeks ago, on Facebook, someone posted this quilt, and he said he bought this quilt this weekend in Nashville. Does anyone know how old it is? And he published 2 very clear photos. And as you notice, well, several people noticed it, that it was, oops, let me get this. How do I, okay. Whoops. Okay, several people replied and said, oh, that's Colonial History, the series quilt of separate patterns put out by Ruby McKim. It was published, most people said it was published in the 1930s. And they said to this owner, why don't you check the Instagram? There's some other ones out there. And I thought, well, I'm going to tell him the exact date. So I went, here we go down the rabbit hole. I went to newspapers.com to get the exact date. And I thought, so I typed in Colonial History into newspapers.com, Ruby McKim, and about 5 different newspapers popped up that contained the series that Ruby McKim was publishing. And it's a 24 block album quilt. Each block is a separate scene from Colonial History. And it began in November of 1926. And I was actually surprised that it was that late. And then I went to the Quilt Index to find other examples, which I often do. And in the course of looking at these examples, I was checking the date to make sure that, you know, years ago, we put these dates in for the state quilt projects. And I was just curious to see if the dates were still correct. But in the course of doing that, I noticed how many of these actually had names of quilt makers on it, and where and how they used this series of patterns. And I'm going to tell you about this one. Whoops. The one in the center. Even the name sounded familiar. And notice it was documented in the Quilts Tennessee project, a project I was co-director of. And remember, we had a cutoff date of 1930. So, hey, this does work, but I couldn't remember documenting this quilt. Well, it turns out that it was made by the great aunt of Bets Ramsey. And she decided to take the pictures and include them. This was after the book came out. And so I called her and I said, is this, the name sounded familiar. She said, yes, those are the sisters of my father and her grandfather. And she said that Vinnie was a school teacher and she used this quilt to teach American history. And she had the children copy the pattern from the newspapers and read each picture had a little story about the event that's portrayed in the pictures. Vinnie's husband was an invalid, and he's the one who embroidered, just loved embroidering, and he just kept putting them out. And if you notice this quilt, there are way more than 24 blocks on it, and there's some duplicates on it. I just thought it was kind of cool to get the story behind the story. It was, going down that proverbial rabbit hole. So here's some more. There's even one at the DAR. And the one on the left was made in the state of Washington, and the one on the right was made in Indiana. The one on the right is the most elaborate because it looks like the quilt maker has done both applique and embroidery on it. And then, of course, I always look at the International Quilt Museum to see what they have. And sure enough, they own one also. And it's exactly like it appeared in the newspaper, and it probably did come, well, no, wait, interestingly, this came in with the James collection. I think it's really a different kind of quilt than most of the quilts that the Jameses collected. And I wonder if there might be a story behind it. The Jameses are from Nebraska. Maybe it's a family quilt that they eventually donated, but I'm not positive. But it is inscribed and dated 1938. One thing to remember, I found out from the round robin quilt collection that I have, is that the pattern Colonial History appeared once in the newspaper, 2020, what was it, 28 through 29, wait, 26 through 27. And, but then Ruby McKim reprinted it, and it appeared in her catalog beginning in 1930. So you could buy these patterns after they appeared in the newspaper. So the date is back there all the way to the Facebook quilt. I'm not absolutely positive that his was made in 1926, 27. But anyway, here we are. So returning to the newspaper research, and here is where things get kind of interesting. I am fascinated to see how the various newspapers used these series. And the one in Stockton, California, had a tremendous response to this Colonial History quilt. Notice here, just a week after it was first announced, over 100 people were saying, well, what McKim was actually also doing was encouraging people to have a contest at the end of the appearance of the quilts to encourage people to finish their quilts. And not every newspaper did it, but Stockton did. And they wanted to find out how many people were really going to consider finishing it. And here it says over 100 persons busily are piecing Colonial History quilt. Not only that, here are names and addresses of quilt makers. Yow! I thought this could be incredible to connect these California women with maybe the California Quilt Project. You know, a woman's name doesn't always appear in newspaper, and here it is. But I kept going. And then there was this cute little young woman who actually won a prize. Her name was Gertrude Ruggles of Stockton. She was just 5 years old when she won the first prize in her category in the Colonial History Quilt contest. And they put her picture in 1927. And then the next year, in 1928, she entered that quilt again in the county fair and won again. By this time, the Bible History Quilt had begun. And so I looked for Gertrude. Like Barbara, I even looked at the census records, 40s and 50s, and I think I found her. I think she's still alive, and she would be over 100 years old now, but
Wow.
there is no record that, or at least that I could find. I have her daughter's phone number. I haven't done it yet, but don't be surprised if I do. Anyway, in the course of looking for her name, while going down that path, I found the name of the McKim contest judge. Another interesting woman who maybe someday we should follow up on, Mrs. Margaret Lacey. She was head of the home department at the county fair there, the Joaquin County Fair, and she was judging the McKim quilt contest. She had done such a good job with the Colonial Quilt contest that this paper decided to do the next series that McKim had, which was called the Bible History Quilt. And this woman was going to judge it. So in the course of that, I searched Bible quilt, and I think you're going to be surprised to see where it led me.
Oh my.
Suddenly, I am way, way back in the 19th century. Now, when I was at, again, newspapers.com, I typed in Bible quilt, and I typed in that little girl's name. And the first newspapers that come up are from 1992, when the Harriet Powers quilt was being duplicated, remember, with the Smithsonian. And I thought, well, I'll just disregard that. And I scrolled on down, and lo and behold, I find an 1895 article about the Harriet Powers quilt, 1895. And it was just because I typed in Bible quilt. So we're going to take a quick little sidestep here. For those of you who may not know the Bible quilt, it was made by Harriet Powers, a Black woman in Athens, Tennessee. She made two quilts. You see them at the top and then in the middle. Both of those quilts were on display at the Boston Museum of Fine Arts last year, where I saw them. I've been fascinated by them. Any quilt historian worth her salt would just love to know anything and everything about the making of this quilt. But there's probably no one who has dug deeper into the rabbit hole about the Harriet Powers quilt than this woman, Kyra Hicks. She was on our show as a guest, maybe 6 or 8 months ago. She's written a book here on the bottom left called, and about her research on the Harriet Powers quilt. And in that book, it's almost like a collection of her rabbit holes that she's gone down through. One of the things that I don't think came out very clearly, even during the show, is that a woman named Jenny Smith owned the quilt on the left. That would be the Bible quilt. And she bought it for $10. She saw it at some county exhibitions in Northwest Georgia. And Harriet Powers also displayed at least 2 other quilts there over the years. Jenny just loved it and tried to buy it from her. And eventually Harriet Powers sold it to her for $10. And then then Jenny displayed it in 1895.
Wow.
Here's what I found. A newspaper article
Jesus.
in a newspaper called Inter-Ocean, published in Chicago, December 1st, 1895. The Harriet Powers quilt was on display in Atlanta in December 1895. Here is an article about it. And this is the most important part.
Oh my God. Oh.
Sight at Atlanta's show, a unique quilt by an illiterate old mammy, shows the Garden of Eden and a good part of the diversified population. Not only is it an article about the quilt, seeing the quilt, with Jenny Smith standing there next to her, next to the quilt. Now remember, Jenny would be the owner at this point. There were 2 illustrations of blocks in the quilt.
Oh.
This was an eyewitness account by a writer named Eleanor Churchill Gibbs, written in dialect. Now, this is a really strange thing that's going on here. The article, you can't see the title of it, but it's called Darky Chatter. Yuck. Apparently, it's a regular column, or in this particular newspaper. That's not true. It didn't, as it turns out, it is not. But this woman, Eleanor Churchill Gibbs, did write for this newspaper. And basically, she's describing the interaction between a Black man named Addison, who comes to the Atlanta show, sees the quilt. Jenny, or a white woman, is standing next to it. And so the reporter, Eleanor Churchill Gibbs, is giving this account of a Black man seeing this quilt in dialect. Now,
Amazing.
is Eleanor Black? Is Eleanor a friend of Jenny? Wow. Anyway, there are a lot of questions here. So this is what I found. And then what I'm going to show you are some of the pictures that were in the article compared to the actual block on the quilt, and just pull out some of the quotations. Shows the Garden of Eden and a good part of its diversified population. And you can see here, there was this animal, not sure what this animal is, but it's here. A lot of this is faded. Here's this animal. Here is Adam and Eve and the serpent over here. And this is what the Addison, the Black man, says. Dat Bible quilt show is pretty curious. The lady said it an original design. I ain't got the recollections to tell you about all the squares, but it got on it all what is in the Bible. She done got Adam and Eve and the old serpent and the bird of paradise and the animals and the tree of life in one square of the quilt. I'm going to read, I don't particularly like the dialect, so I went ahead and read this, but this is pretty cool. I mean, I am translating it. Again, this is Addison saying, the narrator, look, the woman cut a great big old stick for Cain to hit with, and she sewed red calico on the end of it for blood. And she made calico blood just a streaming and streaming out of his brother's side, Abel, who is laying on the ground dead as a hog that has been killed in hog killing times. And there is Cain, just a standing up there, grinning and grinning, getting ready to sass God like he done.
Wow.
And then the next one, again, I'm going to say it in English, or in standard English. Lady, and Addison, again, the Black man is supposedly saying this, lady, ain't that the devil with the 7 sisters round him? And she says, yes. And he says, a woman, a colored woman like me, made the quilt and put the devil on it with 7 stars round him. Now, I say I've seen a heap of quilts, but I've never seen no quilt like that. Got all those curious things on it. It looks like a conjure woman's quilt to me. Then the white lady says, no, it wasn't a conjure woman's quilt. She says, it's a Bible quilt. Then she told me about an old Black woman down in Athens who couldn't read or write, but she knew her Bible by heart. That woman who cut out the devil and the 7 stars does just like her mind told her to do.
Merikay.
Yes. Is this amazing? Okay, the white woman standing beside the quilt must have been Jenny Smith, who purchased the Bible quilt from Harriet Powers in 1891 for $10. According to Kyra, Jenny Smith displayed the quilt there at this exposition in 1895. These illustrations must have come from Jenny. In fact, in the article, the woman pulls out these designs, and no, the man pulls out designs and hands them to the reporter as proof that he had met Jenny at the show. How did the reporter know the writer, Eleanor Churchill Gibbs? Who was Eleanor? And so down the rabbit hole again I went. I searched Eleanor Gibbs, Eleanor Churchill Gibbs, and here she is. She was a professor of English literature in 1898, rhetoric and history.
Oh my God.
And so then finally, down the rabbit hole, I called Kyra. And I didn't call her, I emailed her. I didn't hear from her for a few hours. And then she called me and she said, "Oh, Merikay." And she told me about the afternoon and getting this in the mail. And I said, she said, I had so many other things to do, I couldn't stop. And I said, what did you do? She said, I shrieked. And I thought, a good old Quest of Banbury kind of shriek. And the reason she said to me, she said, you found an 1895 newspaper account with line drawings of the Bible quilt. And Jenny Smith is probably the woman standing with the quilt. And then too, she began to wonder, who was Eleanor Churchill Gibbs? Did she know Jenny? What is this newspaper, the Inner Ocean newspaper published in Chicago? Why write the article in dialect? And are there more articles still to be discovered? So sometimes a rabbit hole takes you to places you're really surprised. To start out with that one from Facebook and end up in the same day.
Unbelievable.
Unbelievable.
Unbelievable. Oh
That
my
really is
God,
remarkable.
Merikay.
Why don't you stop your share?
Okay.
I have a question.
Now, I'm going to be the cynic here. You
Uh-oh.
said Addison was a fictional character.
Of course. Of course. You need to read the whole article because Addison in the beginning is a person who's like on the farm and he's kind of raggedy and he's
Of course.
there's kind of a little dialogue going on. And then she switches to, well, he decides to leave and he goes to the exposition. Why she chose him to be the narrator, I don't know.
Wow.
It's a rhetorical device for a professor of rhetoric.
There you go. Merikay, do I remember that Jenny Smith was an art teacher somewhere?
Yes, in a women's college
So they were both teachers
at the same time. Yes.
Gibbs and Jenny.
Yeah. It turns out I did do some more research on Gibbs's background. She was born in 1840. She lived in Alabama. There were in 1850, there were 42 slaves on her family farm.
Jeez. Wow.
So,
Incredible.
Kyra, when I told her about it, she told me there was a woman named another writer who wrote in the early 20th century. And she was a performer, kind of like a professional storyteller. And she would travel around the Midwest to go to women's groups, she would be on the program, and she would tell stories about the Old South, how it used to be. And she would say, these are stories I learned at my mammy's knee.
Mm.
This is from like the 19 teens to about 1930. So, and in fact, she did do one in she wrote an article about the Harriet Powers quilt. And Kyra had already found that. So when I showed this article to her, she thought it was the same person, but it's not. So maybe the one from the 20th century was continuing a tradition of, I don't know, stories. I don't know. It's strange. Kyra's interested in collecting this, being a Black woman. She's interested. It makes her sick to see it, but she's interested in how it's used. And
What makes her sick?
the dialect. I mean, the beginning of that article said, I mean, the whole thing is offensive to our ears.
Mhm.
But why were people?
Ethnicity was considered amusing. And, you know, if you're Irish, there were Irish dialects. If you're Jewish, there were Jewish dialect stories. It was considered very commonly funny, for one thing. And I always say nobody ever wrote John F. Kennedy's words in his dialect. You know, it definitely was people down. It's unfortunate that it existed. It was incredibly popular, and we can't change the past. So that's all I have to say. But I do want to share my screen and show you something that I saw from Kyra once. Do you see this?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
There it is
Yeah.
at that expo in 1895. So
The Negro building.
at the Negro building, and that was the contemporary name.
Right.
So
What was the date on that?
what's the date on that? 1895. It's from that Atlanta exposition. But I found that on Kyra's webpage.
You know, one thing I found myself going down a rabbit hole for last week for a different reason led me to Michigan State University's special collections, and they have not only the quilt collection and other textiles, but somebody donated their collection of ethnic stereotype postcards. And you can search by Irish stereotypes, Jewish stereotypes, Italian stereotypes. I think there are a couple of others. I was looking for a particular postcard that wasn't, you know, particularly offensive, but it was in an exhibit catalog about Jewish immigrant women's experiences, and it was credited to this collection. It didn't have an accession number or enough detail. So I'm just scrolling through all these things saying, I can't tell whether this postcard was meant to be Jewish or Italian or what, because it didn't have, but a lot of them had little jokes and little speech bubbles with dialect of whatever accents, and of course some visual, you know, signifiers for each thing. So this was a thing this was totally normal at the time. Everyone thought it was hilarious. And, you know, growing up in the 60s and 70s, I heard, you know, ethnic stereotype jokes. People made Polish jokes. People made, you know, various jokes. Whatever the latest group is to make fun of and look down on, people will be making jokes. Fortunately, we're a lot less tolerant of that nonsense now. But it doesn't surprise me in the least that in the Jim Crow era, they're making this very condescending, humorous, supposedly humorous treatment of this old raggedy Negro man.
Isn't it a direct parallel to the minstrel shows?
Yes,
I
I
would,
think
yeah,
so, yeah.
yeah.
So I think it might be a woman's, in this case, a woman's
Mhm.
version
Right.
as a writer. You know, this woman ends up writing a lot of articles in places like Atlantic Monthly. This Inner Ocean newspaper turns out to be it was founded, I think, 1870 in Chicago. And the idea was to try to create a newspaper for the middle class that would reach the nation. And they had extended articles in it. It ended about this time, about 1895. So Kyra went Saturday to the Library of Congress. She lives in Virginia, Northern Virginia. She said it. Her point was, I have to keep up with this research. You know, these things are coming out, they're being digitized. It was not there when she did the book. And, you know, that's the beauty of technology. It's the importance of revisiting history. I think we've seen that already in the.
Yeah, and more coming all the time. And auctions, more and more things come to auction. We get all sorts of new information from them.
Yeah.
So keep them coming.
Yeah. I was able to eliminate 2 Elizabeths from the Sykes and Earl families on my album quilt, because more things have been put up on Find a Grave and so on to sort of really establish, okay, no, she's out of the running. Oh, but then this guy married a second Elizabeth, so maybe it's that Elizabeth, and that wasn't there when I looked, you know, 5 or whenever years ago that Virginia and I were looking at that. So
well, it's time to move on to Julie. And Julie is a quilt dealer of many years, but also curator of the Esprit collection of those wonderful Amish quilts, writer, author, lecturer. So we will get all kinds of interesting things from her. So take it away, Julie.
Let's hope so. Let's hope so. Let me see what I have here. The strange case of the kindred quilts. What am I talking about? It started with this. This is the front cover of a catalog from the Michigan State University Museum when they did an exhibition of my parents' quilt collection some time ago. And the quilt on the cover, I always found fascinating. I didn't understand it. Let's look a little bit more closely at that quilt. That's the whole quilt. It looks a little bit like it may be cut off, but it isn't. It's a completed quilt just like that, those 6 blocks. And here's a close-up on the right of how that one block is constructed, and these multiple, central medallion star, and then multiple borders, some of them diamonds, some of them dog tooth, and some of them straight sashing. There's a close-up of, you can see it a little bit better, and you can see that it is hand quilted. What in the world was that? I thought. It is now in my possession because I inherited it from my parents. Here's another close-up so you can see what's going on. Most of it, some of it is printed, some of it is solid colors, as you can see. What I thought right away was, that looks like a the country Indian Raleigh. That looks so much like it, including this long, narrow format, set on point. Here, let's look at another one. This happens to be appliques, dog-toothy kinds of things, along with piecing. Actually, I think it's all applique, but I was not the only one who noticed the similarities or the intriguing kind of, I mean, who in the world ever saw a quilt like the quilt on the left? Like, what was it? Where did it come from? Well, When my mother bought it, she got information about it, and this is the information that came with it. This is the label in the exhibition, and it says cover photograph, original design, Cleo Fage, White Pigeon, Michigan, circa 1885, hand pieced and appliqued, 60 by 80 inches, cotton with cotton filling. Well, my sense of it was that it wasn't that old, but here was a name, and so I went to look for her and found her buried in the White Pigeon, Michigan cemetery. And there she is. And what are her dates? 1896 to 1983. Unless she made this before she was born, it was certainly not made. It is certainly not dated 1885, presuming that this information, and this is a presumption that I accept, but I realize we have to question, which is, where did that information come from? That's what my mom got. I don't know who she got it from. I just know that that's the information she got. She passed it on to Michigan State University, and that is what they published. So who is this woman? She was born in 1896 in Indiana and died in White Pigeon, Michigan. And here is, on the right, you can see that here is about where White Pigeon, Michigan is. This is the Indiana border. And the two locations, meaning where she was born and where she died, are 15 miles apart. And we know that the families traveled between those two states. She married John Gledwood Fage, and I'm saying Fage, I don't know how you say it, but it appears in doing some research on this that it has a German and French origin. And so I'm kind of just guessing that one would say Fage. He lived from 1894 to 1988 in White Pigeon, Michigan. Her mother was Barbara Yost, who lived from 1870 to 1947. There never appears a father for Cleo, and she appears to be illegitimate, but who knows what may turn up. I did think it was kind of interesting in looking at her maternal grandparents that they were, on her mother's side, both grandparents were born in Pennsylvania into Mennonite families, and whether that has any influence on this quilt that she presumably made, we don't know. I loved this. I had to look up White Pigeon, Michigan, and I just loved this. It exists today. The Tasty Nut Shop and Soda Bar. Nuts from all over the world. The largest assortment of toasted nuts in the United States. There's about 1,200 people that live there, so that's kind of wonderful that they have all the nuts. What's this? I posted a picture of my parents' quilt and Edie McGinnis, who is another quilt aficionado, who was a part of the publishing world of quilt making in this last revival. She sent me this picture. This is a top. What? It's a top. It's 9 blocks, not 6 like mine has, and it's not finished. So let's look a little bit more closely at that. Mine is on the left. Edie's is on the right. Edie said she bought the quilt top from Merikay at Quilt Market in 2014. My mother bought her quilt a lot earlier than that, and I'm going to come to a theoretical conclusion at the end of this talk about what might have happened. Merikay remembers nothing about this quilt. She sold it, but didn't remember anything about where she bought it or who she bought it from. No information, no history at all, and no memory of it. So let's look at Edie's quilt top. You can see that this is the back, and you can see that it's hand sewn. And here are some details, including this cheddary piece that looks like it has the number 19 on it, perhaps in pencil. I have not seen the quilt in real life, but here are details that show really how this thing is constructed and how much it is like my quilt. my mom's quilt. And then I put the two together, and again, Edie's looks like it was never used or washed, and mine has a little bit of fade on it, but the colors are very, very close in both. So in this mystery, here comes the cast in order of appearance. Here's Cleo, who purportedly made the quilt, and then my mom, who bought the quilt, and I don't know where. And then what? Edie bought her top, and lest you think that she's just a quilting feminist, she once posted a picture of herself as a child, and I have to show it to you. I just love that photograph. She's a hoot. Okay, so Edie's got the top, I've got the quilt. Edie got the top from Mary Koval, who I already said didn't remember anything about it. And so Mary comes along in the history and the cast of characters. Here's what I think may have happened. Okay, who is this? This is Sandra Mitchell, the legendary quilt dealer who probably handled more quilts in her career as a dealer than anybody else. Even at this point, Sandra has been gone, oh boy, at least a dozen years. Maybe somebody knows exactly, but quite a while. But she bought and sold so many quilts went through her hands, it's unbelievable. There was a time when she and my mom did a series of shows in Troy, Michigan at a shopping center that had kind of an atrium where dealers set up and exhibitions were shown. Mary attended those shows, and I know, well, there's two Marys here. Mary Koval attended those shows and sold at those shows. Everybody in those days bought from Sandra Mitchell, including Mary Koval. My mother, when she met Sandra Mitchell, Sandra was living in Michigan, and a vast majority of my mom's quilt collection was purchased from Sandra. So my mom is buying quilts from Sandra. Mary Koval is probably buying quilts from Sandra. And my fantasy is that the reason that Mary doesn't remember where the quilt came from is that, so Edie bought it in 1994. My mother bought it long before that. And here's my idea, that Sandra sold my mother the quilt early on and sold the top to Mary. Mary put the quilt in her collection, and it stayed there for so long that when she sold it in 1994, she didn't remember much about where it came from. This is all speculation and the best story I can come up with. But that's my conclusion about what might have happened and what the quilt is and how Cleo Fage or whatever her name was came up with such a design in this small town in Michigan with no apparent relationship to other cultures that this might remind us of, or any other quilt, really. I mean, I think they're just both so odd and so clearly, I mean, I think there's very little possibility that these were not made by the same person, sisters, neighbors, mother and daughter, who knows? There is no, in my little rabbit hole, there was no mention of quilts having to do with anybody in her life in the things that I found and going on in my research. But I think it's kind of fascinating, and I'm wondering what you guys think.
Wow. First of all, it would drive me personally completely insane to have to stitch all those things together. So as usual, I am just in awe of anyone who wants to do that, because that is just not me. I wouldn't finish one row of those little things.
Well,
And it's so well thought out.
It's interesting that one of them is set on point and one of them is set straight.
Mm-hmm.
One of them is 2 rows, one of them is 3 rows. I've not seen them together, so it looks to me from the getting as close as I can to Edie's, that they do share fabrics. I'm pretty sure that they share the sashing fabrics and some of the other solid fabrics, but whether the prints are also shared, I think they do, but I can't really tell.
Well, could you stretch the date when the quilts and the top were made into the 20th century?
I think
So
you'd have to, right?
Yeah.
Because she was born in 1896, and yes.
Yes. So it's possible that she actually did make this, and not one of her mother or her grandmother was obviously, but so were you thinking 20s, 30s here?
It's so hard to tell. The prints in mine look to me like the kinds of prints that were around for a long time, starting in the late 19th century, but going up into the 20s and 30s.
Mhm.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know.
What about the color palette? The cheddar and red together, and then throw in the pink and the blue. What does the colored palette tell us? Barbara's usually good at the color palette, especially good at color palette questions, but all of you are. I'm stumped.
Yeah. One thing, now, there's so many questions about Cleo, if she indeed did make this. What did Cleo do for a living? We don't know. How did she support herself?
There in everything I looked at, there was nothing. The men were all farmers. All the men in her sphere were farmers. In every census, I think I found her in 2, there was nothing.
She never married.
She never married. She was a boarder she was listed as the boarder in the house of her aunt, I think. I'm sorry, I can't remember at the moment, but there were 2 single men who were like, they're not directly related to her, but could have, one could have been, I don't know, could have been her father. I don't know, there's more rabbit holes to
More rabbit holes. Well, my knee-jerk reaction is always when you see a duplicate. People used to say, well, she made one for each of her daughters. Well, Cleo wasn't married. My knee-jerk reaction is now she made them commercially, that she made them and sold them.
Barbara, I want to just back up for a second. She did marry, but there are no
she did.
She married, but no children, at
Okay.
least not.
Well, so she had a support from a husband. The other thing is they still look to me like Raleigh quilts.
How
I mean,
would
I have a hard time getting over it. But the fabrics, for the most part, all being solids, the fabrics and the stars tend to be something you wouldn't see in India in 1925. But that, especially the grays and the blacks, they look
Really?
very much like that 1895, 1925 fashion for gray cotton prints.
Right.
So I don't know. You asked me this earlier, and I went, I don't know.
I don't know.
So were Raleigh quilts being imported into this country?
Yeah.
There's 1,200 people in town. There's 1,200 people in her town.
I know, it's like, how does a Raleigh quilt get to southern Michigan at that time?
I don't know. Ethnic professors going on world tours. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's certainly a rabbit hole because it's endless.
Yeah.
I'm interested that all our rabbit holes are based on comparative, duplicate quilts. It's so once you see a duplicate quilt, you go, okay, that wasn't just an expression of one woman's ideas. There's a cultural thing going on here.
But it's so frustrating. So many quilts divorced from their history, and we are trying to piece it back together with not enough information. It's so frustrating.
So to speak.
What do we do with our spare time, Alden?
I know.
I do think it's curious that one is on point and one is square.
I do too.
And to me, it begs the question of, did she make one first and thought it would work better the other way? Was it her mother? Was it a neighbor? Maybe we should give Mary Koval truth serum. We'll hypnotize her.
And
hypnotize her and
See,
cast your mind back.
she's seen a lot of quilts in her day.
well, also the other thing is that another thing that argues for Sandra Mitchell being in the mix is the cheddar, which is she had a huge love for cheddar and
Yes, she did.
yeah.
Hmm.
So that kind of argues for them coming through her to my mom and to Mary, perhaps.
Mhm.
Hard to say, but I'll tell you, Edie McGinnis really wants to know. She's relying on us, but sorry, can't get there. I do see the number 19 right here.
That's probably the number of yards that were on the bolt or something.
Right.
Yeah.
And someone just with a crayon at the mill wrote that.
Yeah.
You weren't supposed to use that. You're supposed to cut it out.
Well, it's an interesting combination of colors. You've got kind of 20s, 30s pastels, and then these very bold orange and red sashing. But that's would certainly make sense in the fact that Pennsylvania colors spread west, and certainly through Ohio and Indiana. And they hung on, the quilt makers hung on to those red and greens and oranges a long time, way into the 20th century.
Okay.
I thought it was significant, or could be significant, that the grandparents were Pennsylvania Mennonites.
Yeah,
Yes.
that does start making sense. Yeah. I see
Uh-huh.
what you're saying.
Sure does.
Yeah.
And
You'll-
where is Shipshewana, Indiana? Isn't it right there near LaGrange?
It's south and east, if I remember correctly. I don't
Of
know.
Indiana, but it's northern Indiana,
Yeah, it's not far.
Right.
Northern.
so.
You have stumped us.
Yeah.
Rabbit holes beget rabbit holes, maybe, who knows?
They breed like rabbits.
They do. And maybe somebody watching this will, that's what we always hope.
We
If
always have, yeah.
viewers, if you have ideas or know something, you can always
Or
go
have-
to
Or
Facebook,
have seen something similar.
go to the Facebook page and let us know, because we want to keep going on all of these things.
Yep.
Know-it-all, show us your quilt.
Yeah, know-it-alls, show us your quilts.
Julie, why don't you stop sharing and we'll end by in the gallery there. Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah.
All right, I'm gonna do.
Well, very well done, everybody.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you for hosting.
Yeah. What I think is interesting is that it really was rich in detail,
And
Mhm.
lots of crossover.
lots of crossovers, and we call ourselves the know-it-alls, but obviously we don't know it all.
We don't know nothing.
That's why we keep that tongue firmly in cheek.
Or we change our names to wanna know it all. The
Yeah.
wanna know it alls.
Know it all wannabes.
Right. I'm gonna end then, but I should probably say
Our
that next month we have a special treat live.
We do.
We haven't figured it out yet, but we're gonna do a live thing and then record it at American Quilt Study Group. So be there or be square is what we say.
But the
Or
the
be
show
on
will
Zoom.
still air the second Wednesday. of the
Yes.
month. We'll call it the premiere, the recorded premiere.
We'll tape it at AQSG, and it'll be available the Wednesday following, or the next Wednesday
Yeah,
following.
something like that.
But we're
So-
going to live stream that event at
American Quilt
At
Study,
American
Kara's
Quilt
gonna
Study Group.
live stream at the event.
sunny Southern California.
Yes. All right. Well, I'm gonna say bye-bye to you, know-it-alls.
Okay. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
See
you.
you all next time. Bye-bye.
Did you know you can watch our previous episodes on Vimeo? Vimeo.com/Quilt District vimeo.com/VOD_pages, or you can search for the 6 know-it-alls when you go to the main page of vimeo.com. You can also catch our first 3 episodes, which are free, on our YouTube channel. You can go directly to our YouTube channel, or you can go to youtube.com and search for the 6 know-it-alls. You can also find all the updates and links to previous episodes on quiltdistrict.com. Go to quiltdistrict.com and then the 6 know-it-alls tab, and there you'll find all the upcoming episode information, as well as the background on how the 6 know-it-alls got started and some biography information on all of the know-it-alls. You'll also want to be sure you put your email address in here so that you can get notified of upcoming events straight to your email inbox.
And I'm harping on this because lighting is so important to understanding the seasonal rhythms of quilting in this early period and why it began to change in the 19th century.
But that's not the way we use it, just to stick it in there. And so often you will find some turkey red pieces just put in there for a little flair. Even this one has a little bit of red down there, although that's a wool.
This is one quilt that I wanted to talk about today because we just were able to add it to the collection last year. Yeah, it was on loan for many years from the family. And some of you know the quilt maker Anna Catherine, known as Catherine Hummel Markey Garnhart of Frederick, Maryland. And thanks to my predecessor, Nancy Gibson, we now know of 10 quilts made by Markey Garnhart. And we now own 3.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
And that is very interesting that it's made for the wife of a minister. And I have never heard of the lady sewing group being called a circle of industry. So that's quite interesting. I wonder if it belongs to that denomination, if there are others that call themselves something similar.
So I just wanted to show how the designs of these bed rugs relate to whole cloth quilt and other types of quilts. So here we have one of the foot bed rugs, and here we have a whole cloth quilt that was made by Olive Curtis Baker in Connecticut. And the stitching of this whole cloth quilt is basically pretty much the same idea as you see in the bed rug.
The thing is, and this goes back to Lynn too with the bed rugs. If we were looking at men's work, if we were looking at ceramics like graffiti plates or painted chests, we wouldn't be thinking of it as a hobby.